And it happens. I turned 49 yesterday. Yeah, it's going to happen more often. Barbara Sidman, the leader of Tzedakah, will come and introduce our speaker.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I'm Barbara Sidman. I'd like to welcome you all here today, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about our speaker, Mimi Lemay. Mimi is an author, advocate for transgender rights, and a member of Human Rights Campaign's Parents for Transgender Equality Council. She has been advocating for transgender youth since 2015. Beginning with her viral essay, A Letter to My Son, Jacob, on his 5th birthday, and followed shortly by the NBC nightly news segment, Jacob's Journey, Life as a Transgender 5-Year-Old. Still the network's most viewed segment on Facebook. Mimi and the entire Lemay family have fought for passage of anti-discrimination laws in Massachusetts, speaking out for equal access to public accommodations and a conversion therapy ban. Mimi's critically acclaimed memoir, What We Will Become, A Mother, a Son, and a Journey of Transformation, was a finalist for the 2020 Massachusetts Book Award. In it, she weaves the story of her struggle growing up in an ultra-Orthodox Jewish community with her attempts to understand and ultimately embrace her transgender child. In addition to her work with the Human Rights Campaign, Mimi has worked with a wide spectrum of LGBTQIA+ advocacy groups and government agencies to promote equality for transgender individuals. Mimi is a 2020 Commonwealth Unsung Heroine, an award granted by the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women. She holds a master's in law and diplomacy from the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Mimi lives on the North Shore with her family. She considers herself, gratefully, an eternal optimist. Ladies and gentlemen, Mimi Lemay.
Wow, what a welcome. I don't know how I could top off that welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you for giving me the words that Michelle said today. It was so important to me when she reached out to me, because at the time I was thinking about returning to a bigger presence in my Jewish life. And I was thinking about the synagogues in the area. Of course, COVID happened, and that kind of put a delay on my search, but I can say I feel like I have found a home here, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you to Barbara and to Barry and to Renee and to Rabbi Michael and to all my friends and future friends out here in the audience. I really appreciate it. And thank you for being here today. And the cantors, Cantor Sarah, right? Your voice and your music elevated me today. Thank you. This week's Parsha is Parshat Bamidbar. I guess you didn't think you were going to get a Dvar Torah, but here goes. When I was younger, I would have thought that this Parsha was frankly a little boring. There are not many human interest stories, no avot or imahot, no sibling rivalry, no great battles. This is a chapter about counting and numbers, what one might call housekeeping in the desert. In true Jewish style, the Parsha begins with a commandment and a contradiction. God says to Moshe, Se'u et rosh kol adat b'nei Yisrael l'mishbechotam. Take a census, a count of all the congregation of Israel by their families. The rabbis of the Talmud are quick to object. Doesn't it say in a different verse in Hosea, the number of the people of Israel will be like sand, the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured? In fact, this is where the sages draw a rule that a head count of Jews is forbidden. So some congregations, when they're counting for a minyan, will say not one, not two, not three, instead of actually counting numbers. And it comes from this passage. Israel cannot be counted. And yet here we are in the desert, and Moshe receives a commandment directly to count the children of Israel. Several sages weigh in to resolve this problem. And I apologize, I found this on the internet last night, and I couldn't find it again this morning, so I don't know which rabbi said, but the response that I liked the best, that seemed contextually fitting, was that the counting only belonged in a time of galut, as we are in the desert, in less than ideal conditions. And when we are given the fullness of our birthright, and we are redeemed, or living in harmony and well, then the counting will be unnecessary. In fact, possibly forbidden. In honor of this week's Parsha, I will come to you then with both a story about my family and also with numbers. I grew up in an ultra-Orthodox community. Most of my earlier years were spent in Muncie, New York. Some of you may have heard of it. Very strict communities, where I attended schools that had very strict rules about tzniut, about modesty and dress, and about our exposure to what we call the outside world, whether it was with newspapers or magazines. These things were very limited. Despite my insular upbringing, my mother, who had a PhD in philosophy from Boston University, allowed us to have the New York Times. In fact, we embraced learning both secular and religious in our house. And so I grew up with a wish to combine Torah with derech eretz, which some people see that as both immersing oneself in Torah study, but also in learning a secular profession or having a career. In fact, I wanted to be a lawyer for many years. Another very, very Jewish profession. I argued a lot with my elders. But after high school, I attended a very strict ultra-Orthodox Jewish girls' seminary in the northeast of England called Gateshead. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may not have. They're not on the internet. There's very little way to find them. It is inside a very insular Jewish community in the northeast of England that was begun shortly before the end of the Holocaust. And when my mother came to visit me during my second year of seminary, through a shadchan, she met my stepdad. She married my stepdad, and before I knew it, I was a Gateshead girl, which meant I was a girl in the community, and girls in the community did not go to college. In fact, the goal was for me to be married off as quickly as possible at the end of seminary, and to not even delve deeply into my own Torah studies, but rather to take care of all the physical needs of the household and of my husband so that he could go and do learning. And that did not sit very well with me. But because this is the world of Judaism I was raised in, this was the only world I knew. And I felt that my desire to live differently, to be independent, to be outspoken, to combine Torah with derech eretz was somehow wrong. The story of how I left this world is a very long one. Actually, it's not that long, so I'll recap it in a sentence. Arranged engagement at age 20, fell through a month before the wedding, started to question what I was doing in this community and if I had a future here, and eventually decided to strike off on my own. I came to Boston University in 1998 at the age of 22 as a freshman, without any of my family. And pretty soon I had thrown the baby out with the bathwater, meaning I was no longer Torah observant in any way. In fact, I didn't attend shul, and I barely prayed, if at all. And one of the reasons I wanted nothing to do with Jewish observance was because growing up, I was told that there was just one way to be a good Jew. And since that way was not my way anymore, I had chosen differently, I felt that I couldn't be a good Jew, and not being a good Jew and being outside of my klal, my community, meant that I was somehow flawed and wrong, and that God possibly would not want to have anything to do with me. And so in pride, I turned my back, and I walked into a very different future. Within 10 years, I had 2 degrees. I got my graduate degree at Tufts University and had married someone who's not Jewish, and I had what at least the birth certificate said was 3 little girls, and I was a stay-at-home mom. They were all under the age of 4, 4 and a half. And that's when I had a major plot twist. At the age of 2 and a half, my middle child offered up, again in true Jewish fashion, an apparent contradiction. He began to declare, "I am a boy." At first I imagined that he was play acting or pretending, but he had an answer for that too. "I not pretending. I a boy." We tried not to take it seriously at the time. It was at times funny and at times quite awkward, a growing obsession. But our little one had a number of growing obsessions, so we just thought it was a personality quirk for a while. He used to change his clothes about 10 times a day. He went through about 6 months of that. He would put something on. We'd try to head out the door to whatever we were doing activity, and then he'd say, "I can't go out yet, I have to change. This outfit is no good. This is no good." And then we change, and we do that again and again and again. And eventually he settled on one outfit, a sweater, a cornflower blue sweater from Gymboree with a little dog on the front. And that was what we called the doggy sweater. And the doggy sweater was on top of everything, was worn day and, if I couldn't argue hard enough, night. And I had to buy several of them so that we could actually get the laundry done in a normal fashion. And that went on for quite a few months too, along with this increasing contention that he was a boy. But as the days turned into weeks and months, we began to worry. We had explained what we thought was the biological truth, that because he had, at least at the glance, the same reproductive organ or sexual organs as his siblings, that he was a girl. And that's end of story. We tried to frame his claim of being a boy as play acting, or maybe you just want to be like a boy, or you like boy things, and that's fine, and you want to play with the boys, but you're not. And he became increasingly sad, and this was obvious and evident. And he began to withdraw emotionally. He didn't make many friends. We had very few invitations for play dates. And I could see that he was angry, deeply angry, and it was about this topic. We asked a pediatrician, "What is this? What is going on here?" And she didn't have any answers for us. This was back in 2012, 2013. She said that, yes, there are people who are older who identify differently than their assigned sex, but that she'd never heard of a child this young. And if you Googled girl that says she's a boy, back in 2012, there wasn't a lot to go on, and all of it seemed very adult and not at all related to my little child. The word transgender, someone whose gender identity, their deep sense of who they are in relation to gender, is different than their assigned sex, had not been in my vocabulary growing up, for sure. Growing up in our community, we did not even accept gay people. We did not speak about them. And when does not speak about something, we all know it doesn't exist, right? Not really. We were taught that being gay was sinful, a choice, and so in our community, we just didn't know or have gay or transgender individuals. But in the here and now, I saw that I had a growing problem. The problem was that no matter what we did, it was clear that our child was becoming more and more unhappy, and that this belief was the core of what I thought of as a problem at the time. To almost 2 years after he came out to us, our son was still consistently and persistently identifying as a boy. But the number of 4, his age at the time, didn't sit comfortably with me. It felt like he was too young to contemplate any sort of transition, even be it just social, with a name and a pronoun. But I learned about other numbers. I learned that over 40% of transgender individuals had made at least one attempt on their life. 40%, nearly half. I learned that roughly 75% of transgender adults had experienced harassment at their workplace, up to and including losing a job because of the way they presented their gender. The numbers of those experiencing physical and sexual harassment were astronomical. Many transgender adults revealed that the harassment began during their K through 12 years, if they were perceived as expressing themselves differently, even before their transition. I learned about these numbers because for the first time, people had begun to collect data, a census, as you were, of transgender people. At the time, the people collecting the data were organizations that were fighting for transgender equality and against the emergence of so-called bathroom bills, whose language was crafted to pose a false dichotomy between the safety of cisgender women and girls, those who are not transgender, and that of trans people in public spaces. Transgender people were being equated with pedophiles and perverts. And this was the truth, that they were being equated this way, and it was incredibly harmful. These numbers horrified me. It felt like a death sentence for my child. I felt like he was walking in the midbar, where hurt and death were waiting for him. But I also learned some things that made me realize I had a very hard choice coming up. I learned that much of the suffering that transgender people went through could be ameliorated, could be fixed by having supportive family and community. Seeing my son withdraw, seeing the anger and hurt, my husband and I realized that the choice we thought was a choice was not really much of a choice. I'd either force my child to deny this essential part of himself or embrace it and allow him to live authentically. One way was a dark way, a path of shame and rejection and psychological damage. And the other way would present its own challenges, but it would give my child a fighting chance at a good life. So in early June of 2014, much around this time of year, we gave him a choice. Who do you want to live as? What would make you happy? And he chose, in his words, to be a boy always, a boy named Jacob. And so he has been. At the time, it felt like a leap of faith, an absolute shot in the dark. But what we witnessed in the next weeks and days of our son's social transition was nothing short of a nace. It was a miracle. He came to life. He started to interact with his peers, with us. He started to come over randomly for hugs, things that my other children did all the time. And to much greater extent, he would look people in the eye. He would laugh out loud, and he took up new hobbies. He began to shine his beautiful spirit, his neshama, and it was so evident to be seen. In many ways, Jacob brought me back my own faith. I realized that he was a gift to me from Hashem. In him, I think I saw for the first time the distinct difference between the guf, the body, and the neshama, the soul, and how much more we were than just flesh and bone. Knowing that he was a blessing for our family, I concluded that the person who gave me that blessing, deity, God, had also blessed the journey of me leaving my community. Because had I stayed in that community, I have no doubt that I would have not recognized the needs of my child, and I would not have been able to protect him and to give him comfort and a good life. And because my leaving was blessed, that meant that all along, despite my own perspective, God had been with me, and he had wanted every step of this journey to take place. The last 8 years have not been easy, but the least of our problems is meeting our son's needs within the four walls of our home. And also, when our oldest child, our son's older sibling, came out to us 2 years ago during the pandemic and said, I feel that neither male or female suits who I really feel myself to be. I am non-binary. That's the definition of non-binary. I was able to be present for them too and to give them the support they needed. It's a very different journey having a transgender son and a non-binary child, but both are loved and supported in our home according to the best available knowledge and practice of experts on this issue. The hardest part has been watching transgender people become pawns in an unnecessary political war, the so-called culture wars, where disinformation about who our children are, what medical or other support they require, are now punchlines on the internet, in memes, and on the mouths of talk show hosts who are very ill-informed and incendiary. Sorry, I have ADD, so I hear something and I'm like, what does that sound? That's totally fine, happens to the best of us. Now more than ever, numbers and facts are key in winning this battle. So are the numbers of people who show up to vote every time there's a local, state, or national election. And they vote for people who know the facts, who know the numbers, and who support the equality of people like my son. Data is king. Data from a recent CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey given to high school students every 2 years across the country shows that roughly a quarter of our high school students identify as something other than straight or cisgender. So they are something on the LGBTQ+ spectrum. Many of these youth are currently experiencing some level of homophobic or transphobic discrimination in their daily lives. That's another figure that comes from this survey. Whether it's a lack of acceptance at home, pejorative comments by classmates and teachers, or generally the political and social atmosphere that has become very hostile to them. While in states that are trying to pass or have passed discriminatory laws, such as Florida's notorious Don't Say Gay law, or Texas's law that penalizes parents like myself who support our kids in the best medical practices available, the atmosphere is far worse. We would be mistaken to believe, though, that this kind of miasma of hate has not arrived even here in Massachusetts, and my children are feeling it. Statistics coming from the Massachusetts Commission on LGBTQ Youth are not particularly encouraging. However, we have to ask ourselves, is hope lost? Will we stay in this desert forever? These numbers, like the census collected by Moshe and Aaron in this week's Parsha, is essential, particularly because the conditions in our world today are not ideal for everyone. But I also believe that the power of numbers can save us. For example, we can learn the facts. We can understand the true prevalence of biological diversity when it comes to chromosomes, hormones, different body parts, in both human biology and the animal kingdom, because there is a lot of diversity. We can understand the history of colonialism and how this impacted the way we think about gender roles and the way we think about women and men. And the fact that many indigenous cultures that were suppressed had categories for people who were transgender or non-binary, such as the Native American indigenous peoples category of two-spirit, which was celebrated. We can understand how false data, such as the data about high rates of trans kids detransitioning, that is, going back and deciding that they don't want to be transgender. The false data about so-called high rates does not come from peer-reviewed studies, and that most of the people who detransitioned in adulthood have stated that they did so because of discrimination, not because their identities changed. And we can understand how this false data is fueling the idea that these young people should not be supported in their identities. Understanding that evidence-based clinical assessments and the practice of experts across this country represents a true chance for health and well-being for this population, and are supported by all major medical associations in the United States, including the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Medical Association. And all these organizations combined reach about 150 million clinical practitioners. And we're including social workers, right? We're including psychologists, psychiatrists, endocrinologists, pediatricians, general doctors, internists. And also, I want to leave you with one fantastic number, which also comes from this YRBS study. And that is, with one supportive adult in a young person's life, one supportive adult, whether it's a neighbor, a friend's parent, a rabbi, a teacher, a guidance counselor, that rate of feeling like one does not want to be around anymore, the SI, goes down by 40%. Just one adult. So I want you all to think about being that adult in a young person's life and validating a young person's identity with the correct pronouns and name, educating yourself and others on this topic. And the acceptance grows with the conversations you're willing to have at the Shabbat table or under the schach with family members. It's about who you vote for and your support for organizations like Keshet, which is doing a lot of this work in the Jewish community to support our LGBTQ youth. We can make it through this desert, I am sure of it, and to the promised land of equality. But we all need to be counted. We all need to matter. And I look back at that verse in the beginning of Bamidbar, Se'u et rosh kol adat b'nei Yisrael lemishpechotam. To count, Se'u, lis'ot. Lis'ot has another meaning. It means to elevate, to raise one's head. By counting, by telling these youth they matter, we raise them and we elevate all of us in the process. And that is a genuine Jewish value. I'll leave you with the words of Rabbi Hillel, who has been an inspiration for me in my advocacy for many years. He said, Im ein ani li, mi li. If I am not for myself, if I don't fight for myself, then who will fight for me? V'kishani la'atzmi, az ma'ani. But if I'm only for myself, then what am I? Ve'im lo achshav, ematai. And if not now, when? Shabbat shalom. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I would love to take some questions. Any questions? That's what I'm here for. Don't be shy.
I'm just awed by your strength, your family strength, Jacob's. It's amazing. So how is the school helping out in Marble? You live in Marble?
Yes,
I guess?
yes, yeah,
And Jacob's at a public school?
yeah.
Any
And his
support
older
that-
sibling Eli is as well. That's a great question. So it's a mixed answer. The goodwill is there. There's nobody in the administration or any of the teachers who do not want to support trans kids. I firmly believe that. What we are encountering is a lack of understanding of how to do that and a little bit of a lack of urgency. Because when I moved to Marblehead about 4 years ago, I immediately started to engage with the schools that I knew my kids were going to be in to ask them if they could start talking about gender identity, maybe in health class, start observing Pride Month with maybe, talking to the kids that, teaching them not everybody is cisgender. Not everybody has the same gender as they identify at birth, with what they were given at birth. And I had a hard time getting them to move on that as if it was a sense of urgency. And at the time, there were very few kids who were out in the schools, even though more of them are coming out. And the reason for that is there's more discussion about it. So kids are recognizing themselves, they're feeling safer to come out at families. And I truly think that the school has a long way to go to supporting them. But I also know that I've seen a big shift in the commitment this year. I think we have some terrific school committee members who really are going to push the dial on this. And by push the dial, I mean is have windows and mirrors in the schools so that students can see themselves represented, as well as a window into the world of somebody else, and so that's the concept of diversity and inclusion in the curriculum, so that we have more of that about trans kids. I'm also seeing a greater understanding, with the guidance counselors being able to support these kids, but I think we have a long way to go, and I'm gonna keep pushing. Thank you. In the back. Oh, I'm gonna make Rabbi Ragozin run. You look like a runner. I know you can handle it.
Just wondering if you'd like to help out, if we have sources of support for
Thank you.
kids and stuff, how do we, where do we go, how do we find them?
That's great. Well, just by having people who've experienced this world in one way or another come in and talk is a big first step, so I really appreciate it. I would say go to keshet.org. Their page has a lot of information about how Jewish communities and synagogues can become more involved. I would say it would be lovely to have a little affinity group here in the synagogue if there are enough members, congregants who want to, either allies or members of the LGBTQ community at all ages who want to offer to the congregants maybe a few times a year perspective from somebody who is LGBTQ. I know that there are Haggadahs that are made specifically to be inclusive. Those can be introduced during Passover. I'm thinking there's a lot of ways. Definitely if you are a parent in your community, or even if you're not, if you're a grandparent, attend school board meetings where things are being discussed, like introducing curricular materials, because there is, like I said, there's this false dichotomy between the privacy, these privacy issues are brought up that, we don't want trans girls to play sports with our girls because of privacy, when the fact is that nobody should be intruding on anyone's privacy and these kids just want to play. And so things like that are happening in different towns. I don't know if it's happening right here in Swampscott. I know that most folks in Marblehead are fantastic on this issue, but there's a couple of loud voices. So I think that providing an alternate narrative and being able to show people the facts on any given issue when it comes up in school committees, when it comes up in discussions among parents, are so important. Pushing your school to have representative materials, all of these things are incredibly important. And I think it seems like a little thing, but putting a pride flag up on your lawn, just saying that you support, right? Or if you're a teacher or guidance counselor, having a flag up in your office, it says to a young trans or gay kid, I belong here, I will be safe in this space. Thank you. Yes. Oh, God, this young lady there. Yes.
Thank you for enlightening us.
Thank you.
I've always thought that bathroom issue was a way, a smokescreen for bigotry. The bathroom issue can be solved. You can have a single bathroom that someone can go into, they don't have to go into a boys' bathroom or a girls' bathroom. One bathroom in a school could probably do it if you wanted to solve the problem. But the other thing I also worry when fathers get up and say that my daughter was going to be in her locker room and this man, a male, was going to go into the locker room. I always wonder, have they ever been in a girl's locker room? I have never been in a locker room where there weren't individual stalls for showers. I know there aren't in the men's locker room, but in the girls' locker room there are always individual stalls. So it's really not an issue.
Yeah.
Rather than say I'm against this person, the problem is
it's hard. I 100% agree with you, and thank you for bringing that up, because time and again I see, rather than come out and say transgender people make me feel uncomfortable, which is really what underlies a lot of it, people will say, well, I have privacy reasons, I have this reason, so what about this, so what about that? And it's a dog whistle. It's something that is meant to distract you, but if you're of a mindset that you don't want transgender people to exist publicly in public life, which is basically what would be happening if they weren't allowed to use bathrooms anywhere, then you might say that as a cover, right? And the truth is that women's locker rooms have a lot of privacy. And another truth is that transgender women are terrified of this kind of situation, because they know the kind of animosity that some people feel towards them. And I have sat down with a transgender woman who has described to me the absolute terror of going into a locker room in the gym with other women and worrying that she will be made, or like she looks different, or she talks differently. And the fact that she can't even look up from her toes for fear that somebody will accuse her of something. And that happens. I mean, it happens across this country, and the statistics, again, the numbers don't lie. There are very few incidents, if any, of a transgender person behaving inappropriately in a girl's locker, in a locker room, right? But there are plenty of occurrences of harassment, physical, sexual, against transgender women in this country. And so when this confusion and doubt is thrown, we return again to numbers. The numbers are key. Thank you.
I work with kids, and sometimes I encounter the teacher or the parent who doesn't have that sense of urgency, like you were saying, or someone who's just transphobic, and I just don't know what to say to them, because they're very stuck in the way of not wanting to move from their position on the topic. What do you say to someone when you're trying to defend a child? Like, what do you say to someone when you don't want to be out of your place talking to a parent, but you want to help a child?
That's a wonderful question, and thank you for asking it. It's incredibly important. It sounds like for some kids, you might be that one person who makes a big difference to their mental health. I like to direct parents, depending on the parent themselves and what your vibe is from them. I like to direct them to the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is a very respected organization in this country with, some 200,000 pediatricians or something of that number. And there are pages there that have kind of descriptions of transgender kids, what does it look like? It's different than just, play acting. You usually have some consistency and persistence in their identification. And I try to have them say, can you read that and let's discuss this afterwards? Because without basic information about what this is, it's you versus them, right? And people tend to think of this as an opinion as opposed to just an absolute biological occurrence. Out of a certain number of people, some will be transgender. And this is proven in our history, proven by clinical experience of doctors across this country. It just happens. And so if they're saying this doesn't happen, then we need to begin with some information about what does it look like. And usually in that information, there will be some statistics about lack of support being very harmful. And once a parent is able to understand that they're on a journey with their kid, and their kid is on that journey, whether they like it or not. So the question is, are you a supportive person, or are you against? And if you're against, you build up this relationship with a child that, they don't share with you, and that you can't talk through all the issues that you want to talk through. So I urge parents to leave those doors of communication open. Just because a child is coming to you and saying, I think I identify differently than my assigned sex, doesn't mean that they will, that this is the end of the journey. Oh my goodness, let's give them hormones or something. That does not happen. It's a very slow, deliberative, lots of experts. Not everyone needs to transition the same way. There are plenty of people who don't touch medicine It all depends on their own gender, their dysphoria, their different stage in life, right? And none of any of that happens before puberty. But I think a lot of parents have false ideas about this based on what's being spread in the news, particular news, about what it means to be trans and what kind of support these kids need. So information is key.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mimi Lemay will be sticking around for lunch.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. The rock rally. Here at Shirat Hayam, we have reinterpreted Adon Olam to be a medley with a rock band to celebrate Shabbat.